On the 9th of March, 1945, a day drawing to a close across the Mariana Islands in the vast Pacific, the sun casts long shadows over American airfields on Guam, Saipan, and Tinian, painting the sky in hues of orange and red. Down below, on runways, carved from what was once Japanese soil, ground crews swarm around 325 colossal Boeing B-29 Superfortress bombers, their final checks a meticulous dance of preparation for a night of fire. A command has been issued by Major General Curtis LeMay, the formidable leader of the 21st Bomber Command, a command that will forever alter the tactics of the Pacific War, a truly radical departure from all that has come before. Inside bomb, bays stretched beyond their engineered limits, are clusters of devastation, 1,520 M69 incendiary bomblets packed into each aircraft, every single one filled with a substance called napalm, ready to unleash a torrent of fire burning at an unimaginable 800 degrees Fahrenheit. The target is as strategic as it is chillingly controversial, the heart of Tokyo's Shitamachi district, a densely woven tapestry of wooden homes where 750,000 souls are packed into a mere 12 square miles of existence. As the clock strikes 17:35 hours, the first gleaming silver B-29 heaves itself from Guam's north field, its ascent a promise of the storm to come. Through the deepening twilight, a thunderous roar echoes as the powerful R-3550 engines of bomber after bomber ignite, each aircraft taking to the heavens not in formation, but as a solitary predator, stripped of most of its defensive armor to carry a doubled payload of fire. They follow the leaders, the Pathfinder aircraft, whose solemn duty is to paint a burning X upon the target, a beacon visible for miles, guiding the main force as they descend to a breathtakingly low 5,000 to 7,000 feet, a mere fraction of the altitude for which they were designed. What is about to unfold will be a terrifying testament to the overwhelming force of American incendiary warfare, a night that will starkly reveal why Japan's air defenses, for all their fierce determination, were utterly powerless to prevent the most significant single air raid in the annals of history. The American Boeing B-29 Superfortress had descended upon the Pacific theater as the absolute pinnacle of aviation technology in World War II, a revolutionary bomber born from over 1.4 million hours of engineering genius and a staggering $3 billion investment, a sum that dwarfed even the $1.9 billion Manhattan Project. This four-engine heavy bomber was a marvel of innovation, boasting groundbreaking features like pressurized crew compartments for high-altitude flight, remotely controlled gun turrets that bristled with defensive power, and the most potent piston engines ever to be fitted to an aircraft. Its creation was a testament to a nation's industrial might, with manufacturing spread across the country. Boeing churned out bombers in Seattle, Renton, and Wichita. The Glenn L. Martin Company contributed from Omaha, and Bell Aircraft Corporation joined the effort in Marietta, Georgia. Each B-29 was a giant, stretching 99 feet in length, with a majestic wingspan of 141 feet, propelled by four Wright R-3350 duplex Cyclone engines, each one roaring with 2,200 horsepower. This incredible machine could carry a payload of up to $20,000 pounds of bombs over a combat radius of 1,600 miles, soaring at altitudes reaching 31,150 feet, with a top speed of 357 miles per hour. By the time March 1945 arrived, American factories had delivered a formidable fleet of approximately 2,000 B-29s to combat units, with production lines accelerating towards an eventual wartime total of 3,170 aircraft. This colossal manufacturing effort was a stunning demonstration of American industrial capacity. Boeing's Wichita plant alone was producing an astonishing 2 Superfortresses for every single working day. The 20th Air Force, under the direct command of General Henry Hap Arnold, had first unleashed these strategic bombers from bases in China starting in June 1944, before shifting operations to the newly captured Mariana Islands on November 17, 1944. From the Marianas, the 21st Bomber Command operated three powerful bombardment wings: the 73rd and 313th based on Saipan, and the 314th on Guam. Together, these units could dispatch over 300 B-29s for a single, overwhelming mission, each aircraft meticulously maintained by dedicated ground crews working tirelessly around the clock. Standing in stark, almost tragic contrast was Japan's air defense system. By the dawn of 1945, the Imperial Japanese Army and Navy operated as two separate, uncoordinated entities, their command structures isolated with virtually no communication between them. Their principal night fighter, the Nakajima J-1N Gecko, or Moonlight, was a hasty conversion from a reconnaissance aircraft. It was armed with twin 20mm Type 99 cannons firing upwards at a 30-degree angle and another pair firing downwards, a design that theoretically allowed it to attack bombers from unexpected vectors. However, Japan had only managed to produce a mere 479 of these aircraft throughout the war, and many had already been lost in combat. The Kawasaki Ki-45 Toryu, the Dragon Killer, served as another night fighter option, equipped with a 30cm cannon in its nose and obliquely firing 20mm cannons, but only one 701 had been manufactured since 1941. Critically, without radar for night interception, these aircraft were forced to rely on searchlights and the naked eye, an almost impossible task against fast-moving bombers cloaked in darkness. Ground-based defenses were equally inadequate. The entire Tokyo metropolitan area was defended by fewer than 500 heavy anti-aircraft guns. The Type 99 80mm Network gun was the main high-altitude defense, while the Type 98 20mm cannon offered closer-range protection, but with an effective ceiling of only 11,500 feet. Most critically, Japan's anti-aircraft artillery lacked fire control radar, depending instead on optical rangefinders and sound locators that were rendered completely useless in poor weather or at night. The numbers themselves told a story of impending doom. While America could deploy hundreds of B-29s from the Marianas alone, Japanese forces could muster perhaps only 200 operational night fighters across all the home islands by March 1945. Crippling fuel shortages severely restricted training flights, leaving new pilots with dangerously minimal night flying experience. Aviation gasoline had become so precious that many aircraft were grounded, their fuel preserved for the desperate defense against the anticipated American invasion. Major General Curtis LeMay, upon assuming command of the 21st Bomber Command in January 1945, inherited a strategic bombing campaign that had, until that point, failed to deliver any decisive blows. The previous strategy of high-altitude precision, bombing from 30,000 feet, had been utterly defeated by the jet stream, a powerful river of wind exceeding 200 miles per hour that scattered bombs miles away from their intended targets. The tremendous strain on the engines from climbing to such altitudes with heavy bomb loads led to frequent mechanical failures, with magnesium alloy components overheating and failing. To make matters worse, persistent cloud cover obscured targets, 70% of the time forcing bombardiers to rely on primitive and inaccurate radar. After a thorough analysis of these immense operational challenges, LeMay made a revolutionary decision, a choice that would fundamentally transform the air war against Japan. His new tactics were as radical as they were brutally logical. LeMay ordered all defensive guns stripped from the B-29s, save for the tail positions, a daring move that allowed each bomber to carry a staggering 7 tons of incendiaries instead of the usual 5 tons of high explosives. By flying at a much lower altitude of 5,000 to 9,000 feet, they would avoid the jet stream, reduce the punishing strain on their engines, and dramatically improve their bombing accuracy. Attacking at night would minimize their exposure to Japanese fighters, which were severely handicapped by their lack of radar and trained night fighter pilots. Instead of flying in concentrated formations, the aircraft would navigate individually using LORAN radio signals, attacking in a continuous, relentless stream over several hours. Weather forecasters predicted perfect conditions for the night of March 9th to 10th. Clear skies and strong surface winds that would act as a bellows, fanning the flames and spreading the fires across the sprawling target area. The selection of this target revealed the cold, strategic nature of the operation. American planners had pinpointed areas where Japan's cottage industries thrived, small workshops integrated within residential zones that produced crucial aircraft, parts, electrical equipment, and precision instruments. Intelligence officers had meticulously consulted maps produced by the Office of Strategic Services, ranking Tokyo's wards by their infrastructure density, utilizing pre-war Japanese urban planning documents to identify the most vulnerable areas. The chosen zone in northeastern Tokyo encompassed the Asakusa, Honjo, and Fukagawa wards, working-class neighborhoods characterized by an extremely high population density, where extended families lived in wooden structures packed tightly together, separated only by narrow, winding alleys. The M69 incendiary bomblet itself was a marvel of advanced warfare technology. This hexagonal steel pipe, measuring 3 inches in diameter and 20 inches long, weighed a mere 6 pounds. Unlike earlier thermite or magnesium designs that burned hotter, but could be extinguished, the M69 employed napalm, a jellied gasoline developed by the brilliant minds at Standard Oil and Harvard University. These bomblets were dropped in E-46 aimable clusters of 38, which would separate at an altitude of 2,000 feet. As each M69 fell, a cotton streamer deployed, orienting its fuse to point downwards. Upon impact, a time delay fuse would burn for 3 to 5 seconds before a white phosphorus charge ignited, violently dispersing flaming napalm in multiple directions up to 100 feet. This delayed action was a crucial design feature, ensuring the weapon would be lying on its side when it detonated, maximizing the spread of the incendiary material through the fragile wooden buildings. Extensive testing at Dugway Proving Ground in Utah, using replica Japanese residential structures, had already proven the M69's horrifying effectiveness. The weapon was designed to create multiple ignition points across vast areas, with napalm that adhered tenaciously to surfaces and fiercely resisted water-based firefighting efforts. A single B-29 carried 40 of these cluster bombs, containing a total of 1,120 individual bomblets, and with 279 bombers ultimately reaching the target out of the 325 launched, Operation Meetinghouse was set to unleash approximately 424,000 incendiary bomblets upon Tokyo, creating an unprecedented concentration of incendiary devices. American planners had calculated that this density would create a self-sustaining conflagration, a firestorm where separate fires would merge into one, generating powerful wind currents that would spread the inferno far beyond the initial impact zone. The first B-29 clawed its way into the sky from Guam just after 5:30 p.m. on March 9th, piloted by the mission commander himself, Brigadier General Thomas Sarsfield Power of the 314th Bombardment Wing. Over the next few hours, a steady stream of bombers took off at 50-second intervals from 3 different island bases, embarking on a grueling 14-hour round trip that would push both men and machines to their absolute operational limits. Inside the aircraft, crews were dressed in lighter flight gear instead of their heavy, cumbersome suits, a small comfort afforded by the warmer temperatures at the lower altitudes. Without the immense weight of guns, gunners, and ammunition, the B-29s climbed with a newfound efficiency, conserving precious fuel during the long 1,500-mile journey to Japan. As they approached the Japanese coast, the majestic snow-capped peak of Mount Fuji served as a prominent, almost surreal navigation checkpoint. Air raid sirens began to wail across Tokyo around 10:30 p.m., yet most of the city's inhabitants initially remained in their homes, a dangerous complacency born from the limited damage caused by previous high-altitude raids. Tokyo's civil defense preparations were tragically inadequate for the hell that was about to be unleashed. The city had only 18 concrete air raid shelters, capable of protecting a mere 90,000 people out of a population of 4.3 million. Most families had to rely on bogo, shallow trenches covered with boards, or simple dugouts that offered minimal protection against the incendiary storm that was approaching. The city's 8,000 firefighters were equipped mainly with hand pumps and bucket brigades, tools designed for peacetime emergencies, not for a cataclysm. Neighborhood associations had organized civilian firefighting groups, consisting primarily of elderly residents, women, and teenagers, armed with nothing more than sand buckets and water containers. The first Pathfinder B-29s arrived over Tokyo at 12:08 a.m. on March 10th, approaching from different directions to mark the target zone. Flying at a terrifyingly low 5,000 feet, they dropped M47 napalm bombs that immediately erupted into visible fire markers, forming an enormous burning X in the heart of the city. The main force arrived just minutes later, their bombardiers aiming for the ominously illuminated marker. The weather conditions proved to be a significant and deadly factor in the operation's success. The visibility was clear, with surface winds blowing between 17 and 28 miles per hour, though gusts reached up to a ferocious 45 miles per hour. As the M69 clusters separated and descended, observers described them as metallic objects glinting ominously in the firelight. A hauntingly beautiful sight that preceded an unprecedented level of urban destruction. Within minutes, thousands of individual fires erupted across the target zone. The strong winds, acting as a demonic bellows, quickly spread the flames from building to building, merging the separate blazes into a massive, roaring conflagration. Temperatures at ground level soared beyond 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to melt glass and warp metal infrastructure. The superheated air created powerful updrafts, generating intense wind vortices that lifted debris high into the air. The streets themselves became impassable as asphalt ignited and wooden buildings collapsed under the extreme heat. The sound of the inferno was deafening, overwhelming all other noise, while thick smoke and intense heat reduced visibility to mere feet. 24-year-old Yoshiko Hashimoto was at home in Tokyo's Sumida district with her 13-month-old baby when the attack began. Her husband, an army officer, on guard duty across the city. Her testimony, later provided for historical records, paints a harrowing picture of the chaos. The B-29s were dropping numerous firebombs, and it sounded like heavy rain, she recalled. I was astounded to see the intensity of the air raid. I had never seen one before. As the fires spread with terrifying rapidity, Yoshiko fled with her parents, her baby, and her sisters through streets choked with evacuating residents. The narrow alleys of Shitamachi became death traps as thousands of people attempted to escape simultaneously. In the pandemonium, parents were torn from their children, and elderly residents who fell were tragically left behind, unable to continue. Firefighting brigades were forced to abandon their equipment as the temperatures made it impossible to even approach the flames. At the Sumida River, Yoshiko witnessed scenes of utter chaos. Burning debris was falling all around us, and the wind was intensifying, she said. Burning materials, signboards, wooden doors, and household items were all airborne. Warehouses on both riverbanks were completely engulfed in flames. In a desperate act of survival, her father pushed her and her baby into the water, an action that saved their lives but condemned her mother, father, and sister Etsuko to perish in the inferno. Across the burning district, similar tragedies were unfolding with heartbreaking repetition. Those who sought refuge in canals found themselves in water of extreme temperatures. Others were crushed in the desperate rush, as thousands tried to reach the water simultaneously. The winds generated by the conflagration were powerful enough to physically move people significant distances, with some victims later found far from their original locations. Police stations, hospitals, and designated evacuation centers, places of supposed safety, became surrounded by the encroaching flames. At the Kikukawa Elementary School, a designated shelter, investigators later found only twisted metal objects and charred remains among the ashes where hundreds had sought refuge. Ancient Buddhist temples that had stood for centuries were utterly destroyed, along with all those who had sought sanctuary within their walls. The extreme conditions created by the inferno meant that even those in shelters faced a severe and often fatal threat from the intense heat and suffocating smoke. The superheated air caused severe respiratory damage to anyone exposed to it, even for a brief moment. In the aftermath of the raid, casualty estimates varied significantly among the different authorities. The United States Strategic Bombing Survey calculated 87,793 fatalities and 40,118 injuries. The Tokyo Metropolitan Police Department reported 83,193 deaths and 40,918 wounded. The Tokyo Fire Department estimated a staggering 97,000 killed and 125,000 wounded. However, the historical consensus today indicates that over 100,000 people died that night, a figure that exceeds the immediate casualties from either of the atomic bombings that would follow. The attack destroyed 267,171 buildings across 15.8 square miles, completely eliminating 25% of Tokyo's structures and leaving over 1 million survivors homeless. The impact on industry was severe. More than half of Tokyo's manufacturing occurred in small workshops nestled within residential areas, and their complete destruction significantly impacted the production of essential war materials. Thousands of skilled workers were either killed or displaced from the city, a loss from which Japan's war effort would never recover. American losses, in stark contrast, were comparatively minimal. Only 14 B-29s failed to return, with 96 airmen listed as killed or missing. Several of the bombers encountered severe turbulence from the thermal updrafts created by the massive fires below, causing them to lose control. Others sustained damage from anti-aircraft fire during their low-level runs, though Japanese gunners struggled to track the aircraft at such unusually low altitudes. Aircrew members later reported being able to detect the smell of smoke, even at their operational altitude. The crews, who had initially questioned LeMay's radical tactics, were profoundly sobered by the sheer scale and devastating impact of the operation. General LeMay himself later reflected on the heavy moral implications of his decision. "I suppose if I had lost the war," he stated, "I would have been tried as a war criminal." General Arnold, however, sent his congratulations, declaring, "This shows your crews have the guts for anything." The operation's devastating impact immediately and profoundly influenced American strategy. Within just 10 days, similar incendiary raids struck Nagoya, Osaka, and Kobe, targeting Japan's 4 largest cities. The campaign was then paused only because the 21st Bomber Command had completely exhausted its supply of incendiary bombs. Production was immediately and dramatically increased, with American factories prioritizing the manufacturing of the M69. The chasm between American and Japanese capabilities had reached its absolute maximum disparity. While the United States could replace its lost B-29s within a matter of weeks, Japan could not possibly rebuild its destroyed urban areas or replace its lost workers. American industrial production exceeded Japan's by a staggering factor of 10. While technical advantages made each American weapon significantly more effective, the B-29 program's $3 billion cost alone exceeded Japan's entire military budget for 1945. While America was producing 50,000 tons of incendiary bombs every month by mid-1945, Japan was struggling to maintain even basic ammunition supplies. The methodical nature of the American operations reflected a cold, scientific approach to warfare. The Chemical Warfare Service had constructed detailed, full-scale replicas of Japanese neighborhoods at the Dugway Proving Ground, using pre-war architectural plans to ensure accuracy. The Standard Oil Development Company had created napalm through extensive chemical research. Harvard and the University of Chicago contributed analytical studies on fire propagation patterns, modeling how the flames would spread. This seamless integration of scientific research with military operations stood in stark contrast to the Japanese military doctrine, which emphasized traditional values and fighting spirit over material considerations, an approach that proved utterly inadequate against the brutal, calculated methods of modern warfare. Japan's complete inability to develop any effective countermeasures demonstrated its deep-seated strategic limitations. Despite a preliminary raid on February 25 that had already destroyed 28,000 buildings, the authorities made only minimal improvements to the city's fire defenses. Proposals to create fire breaks by demolishing buildings were never implemented, and evacuation plans remained largely theoretical. Military authorities insisted that civilians should maintain their positions and fight the fires, even as intelligence clearly indicated that massive incendiary raids were being planned. This disastrous situation was a direct result of the catastrophic failures in inter-service coordination and severe leadership constraints. The limited effectiveness of the Japanese night fighter forces starkly exposed the immense technical disparity between the two nations. While pilots like Lieutenant Sachio Endo achieved individual successes, credited with 8 B-29 interceptions, these were rare and exceptional cases. Most night fighter pilots were simply unable to locate their targets in the darkness, especially once the thick smoke from the fires obscured all visibility. Without airborne radar, the pilots were entirely dependent on ground controllers using acoustic detection methods, which became completely ineffective once the fires started. The few pilots who did manage to intercept the B-29s found that their 20mm cannons were often insufficient to bring down the bombers' robustly constructed airframes, unless they achieved critical hits on the engines or fuel systems. In desperation, some pilots resorted to ramming attacks, sacrificing their own lives for a single bomber kill. Tokyo's fire department exemplified Japan's infrastructural limitations. The entire city operated with only 286 fire engines, most of which were manual pump units requiring multiple operators. The water pressure was insufficient for large-scale firefighting, and the damage to the infrastructure quickly compromised the water distribution system. The fire department's procedures emphasized protecting individual structures through traditional methods, approaches that were hopelessly inadequate against thousands of simultaneous ignition points. When the conflagration began, most of the fire companies were overwhelmed with shocking rapidity, their equipment destroyed, and their personnel forced to evacuate for their own lives. The psychological impact on the survivors was profound and lasting. Many described a feeling that all their traditional systems of protection had completely failed them. Refugees fleeing from the smoldering ruins of Tokyo spread their terrifying accounts throughout Japan, their experiences directly contradicting the official government information about the war situation. Worker attendance at factories declined significantly as civilians lost all confidence in their leaders. The term routine air raid entered common usage as city after city was systematically targeted. By August 1945, 66 Japanese cities had experienced major incendiary attacks, with much of urban Japan severely damaged even before the atomic bombings occurred. The operation's overwhelming success heavily influenced American planning for Operation Downfall, the planned invasion of Japan. Military planners calculated that continued incendiary raids would completely eliminate Japan's remaining industrial capacity by October. LeMay himself believed that strategic bombing alone might be enough to compel surrender, without the need for a bloody and costly invasion. Joint Chiefs of Staff estimates indicated that conventional bombing had already caused approximately 900,000 civilian casualties, and would cause millions more if the conflict continued. These stark assessments heavily influenced President Truman's decision regarding the use of atomic weapons, viewing them not as an alternative to conventional bombing, but as potentially decisive psychological weapons to finally end the war. The human dimension of this tragedy transcended national boundaries. American aircrews carried heavy psychological burdens for years, processing their role in the operation despite the context of wartime. Richard Bale of the 9th Bombardment Group could observe the fires clearly from his aircraft, an image that he said remained with him for the rest of his life. Japanese survivors, on the other hand, lived with lasting physical and emotional scars. Families on both sides of the conflict experienced irreplaceable losses that affected multiple generations. The raid created numerous orphans and widows, completely overwhelming the social support systems and contributing to the immense challenges of the post-war era. Recovery efforts revealed the comprehensive and absolute nature of the destruction. Medical facilities in the target area were completely eliminated, along with educational institutions, religious buildings, and administrative centers. The morning of March 10th revealed a transformed alien landscape where eastern Tokyo had once existed. Only concrete and brick structures remained standing across miles of ash-covered ground. Survivors wandered aimlessly through unrecognizable areas, searching for landmarks that no longer existed. Recovery teams required heavy equipment to clear the debris-choked streets. Many of the victims could not be identified, and mass funeral services continued for weeks. The waterways remained blocked with debris for extended periods. The industrial impact of the raid far exceeded the initial projections. Tokyo's eastern districts had contained thousands of small workshops where families produced specialized components, precision instruments, electrical components, mechanical fittings. Their complete elimination disrupted the supply chains that supported the major factories. The loss of experienced craftsmen, machinists, and technical specialists who required years of training proved to be an irreplaceable blow. Worker productivity in the surviving facilities plummeted as employees dealt with personal losses, housing challenges, and severely diminished morale. The campaign's expansion proceeded systematically after the incendiary supplies were replenished. Operations resumed in May with refined techniques that achieved even greater efficiency. By July, B-29s were distributing warning leaflets before the raids, informing civilians which cities were targeted next. A psychological operation that demonstrated America's complete and total air superiority. These missions became routine operations, with some encountering only minimal opposition. Japan's defensive capabilities progressively weakened as experienced pilots were lost, ammunition was depleted, and the civil defense systems completely collapsed. The international legal considerations of the raid remain subjects of intense historical debate. The 1907 Hague Convention addressed the bombardment of undefended cities, but the interpretations of defended and military targets proved to be highly complex. While post-war tribunals prosecuted certain Axis leaders for the targeting of civilians, they did not address the Allied bombing campaigns. The precedent established that military necessity could justify impacts on civilian areas has influenced the subsequent development of international humanitarian law. Despite the advances in precision weapons technology, the role that weather conditions played in amplifying the operation's effects demonstrated America's masterful utilization of environmental factors. The March 9-10 raid was deliberately scheduled to coincide with predicted strong winds following a dry period. Meteorologists had analyzed Japanese weather patterns extensively, identifying the optimal conditions for fire spread. The varying wind speeds that night, between 17 and 45 miles per hour depending on the location, actually exceeded some of the predictions. This integration of meteorological science with military planning exemplified the comprehensive American operational approach. Individual B-29 crews experienced the mission very differently than the planners had anticipated. Many were deeply affected by observing the sheer scale of the destruction unfolding below them. Aircrew members reported that the smoke and atmospheric disturbance were detectable even at their operational altitudes. Pilots had to skillfully manage their aircraft through the severe turbulence created by the thermal conditions. Some crew members later requested different assignments, struggling to reconcile their participation in the raid with their personal values. Others, however, remained focused on the strategic objective of ending the conflict as quickly as possible. The Japanese military response, or lack thereof, revealed severe command and control limitations. Anti-aircraft units engaged continuously throughout the raid, but achieved only limited success in the darkness and smoke. Fighter squadrons launched 90 sorties, but only accomplished a few scattered interceptions. The fire department leadership received insufficient warning about the raid's massive scale. Military authorities prioritized the protection of government and military facilities while civilian areas were left to burn. Communications completely failed as the infrastructure was destroyed, and messengers were unable to traverse the affected areas. Post-war memorialization of the event reflects evolving historical perspectives. Unlike Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which gained immediate and widespread international recognition, the Tokyo firebombing remained less widely known outside of Japan. Survivors advocated for decades to have their experiences documented. Katsumoto Saotome, a survivor himself, established the center of the Tokyo raids and war damage, preserving testimonies that might otherwise have been lost to history. The challenge of commemorating civilian losses while acknowledging the historical context created complex and often contested memorial narratives. Contemporary military strategists still study Operation Meetinghouse for insights into the capabilities and limitations of air power. The raid demonstrated that urban destruction alone does not guarantee an immediate surrender. Japan continued to resist for 5 more months. It proved that technical advantages can overcome geographic challenges, but it also showed that distinguishing between military and civilian targets becomes extremely difficult in modern warfare. The evolution from precision to area bombing revealed the dangerous escalation dynamics inherent in total war. The 21st Bomber Command had initially attempted precision strikes, following the established doctrine. When these proved ineffective, LeMay shifted to area incendiary attacks that were operationally simpler and far more impactful. This progression occurred through a series of operational decisions rather than through explicit policy changes. By March 1945, urban area attacks had become routine, with target selection based on population density and industrial distribution rather than on specific military installations. Survivor testimonies document a lasting and profound trauma. Many experienced persistent psychological effects for decades after the war. Children who were separated from their families often never learned the fate of their relatives. Yoshiko Hashimoto's testimony remains preserved in historical archives, a haunting testament to the human cost. "The memory of that night never leaves me," she said. "My mother, father, and sister died while my baby and I survived. I think about them every single day." The social structure of working-class Tokyo was fundamentally and irrevocably altered. Extended families were dispersed, traditional businesses were eliminated, and neighborhood networks that had existed for generations disappeared overnight. The ultimate assessment of Operation Meetinghouse involves its role in ending the war. While historians continue to debate whether strategic bombing alone could have compelled surrender, the raids clearly accelerated Japan's military collapse. The systematic urban destruction created conditions where continued resistance became increasingly difficult. Emperor Hirohito himself later referenced the bombing campaigns and the dire domestic situation as factors in his decision to surrender. The 100,000 people who died in Tokyo that night contributed to ending a conflict that an invasion might have prolonged, potentially causing millions more casualties. A cold, strategic calculation that provides little comfort to the survivors, but undoubtedly influenced the decisions made at the highest levels. The story of Operation Meetinghouse illustrates the terrifying evolution of warfare, from limited military engagements to comprehensive societal conflicts. Residential areas that had been built over generations were utterly destroyed in a matter of hours by weapons manufactured thousands of miles away. The conflict that began with territorial expansion ended with advanced technology directly affecting civilian populations who had minimal direct military involvement. The stark disparity between the B-29s, carrying their sophisticated incendiaries, and the Japanese defenders, equipped with only basic firefighting tools, illustrated the decisive importance of industrial and technical capabilities in modern warfare. A profound historical irony remains. The staggering impact of this operation was largely overshadowed by the atomic bombings that followed 5 months later. The greater immediate casualties of March 10th became less prominent when compared to the unique and terrifying nature of nuclear weapons. allowing conventional bombing to receive less scrutiny in the post-war era. This historical perspective permitted the continued development of conventional area effect weapons, including various incendiary weapons, in subsequent conflicts, without the same level of prohibition associated with nuclear arms. The statistics, as stark as they are, provide only a partial understanding of the event. 325 B-29s launched, 279 reaching the target, 1,265 tons of incendiaries dropped, 15.8 square miles affected, 267,171 buildings destroyed, 100,000 casualties, 1 million displaced. Behind each of these cold numbers were individuals. American air crew members executing their military orders, Japanese families in their residential areas, children separated from their parents, survivors left to deal with profound and unimaginable losses. Operation Meetinghouse remains history's most destructive air raid, serving not as a symbol of military achievement, but as a sobering and timeless reminder of modern warfare's terrifying capacity for destruction, a world where strategic objectives can be used to justify extensive civilian impact, and where entire populations become engulfed by industrial-scale conflict.